Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are grateful that you are with us tonight. How you doing? My name is Mike McGuire, and I'm honored to be able to work with you in the California State Senate representing the North Coast in the Bay Area. And we are so grateful to our esteemed panel who is with us. We're going to hear from them in just a few moments. We want to welcome you to our town hall on the climate crisis. And I want to be candid here tonight. The alarm could not be louder. Climate change is here. The evidence is clear, and the impacts are dangerous. Experts believe that climate change has made California and the American West warmer and drier over the last 20 to 30 years. Extreme heat is now the top weather-related killer in the United States. Western states are now more susceptible to extreme drought and larger, more destructive and more frequent wildfires. Our coastal communities are already experiencing early challenges with sea level rise. And we know that California's climate has always been variable, but those last couple of decades have been some of the hottest on record here in the Golden State. And we also know that this crisis is evolving faster than anticipated. And communities, big and small, up and down the California coast, are starting to witness climate change damaging impacts. And if we don't act to mitigate climate change, our kids' lives, our grandkids' lives will be worse off than what we're seeing here today. And I firmly believe that there are solutions, but it's going to take all of us working together, advancing bold solutions to the most pressing challenge, and that's our climate crisis. And that's why the legislature here in California just acted. We approved the single largest investment in climate action in the history of the Golden State. Over $15 billion in funding to tackle the growing wildfire crisis in the state was allocated. We'll be investing in drought response and resiliency, helping communities prepare for extreme heat and sea level rise. And we're advancing funding for more sustainable agricultural practices. This investment is truly a nation-leading climate package. And while Californians have historically led this nation on emission reduction efforts, now more than ever, we have to redouble our focus to combat this growing crisis. And that is why we are so grateful that you have joined us here for this informative evening. And we are so honored that we have some of the top experts in America on climate change who are joining us on this all-star panel. They're going to be talking about their concerns. They're going to be providing their blunt outlook and, of course, advancing data-driven, science-focused solutions to the climate crisis. With us tonight, we are grateful. We have climate scientist Daniel Swain. He's from the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. We're really grateful tonight that we have Christina Dahl here. She's a senior climate scientist from the Climate Energy Program with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Good evening to you. And of course, we have Peter Miller. Peter is the Director of Climate and Clean Energy with the Natural Resources Defense Council here in the Western region. Once we hear from this amazing all-star panel here tonight, we're looking forward to hearing from each and every one of you. And by the way, we have just got word we are now over 4,000 strong from all across Northern California joining us for this Climate Crisis Town Hall. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. Now, I want to let you know we've received literally hundreds of questions prior to tonight's town hall that were submitted via email. We're going to be getting to as many of those as possible. And we're also going to be taking your live questions, hearing your concerns, of course, your comments. And yes, we want to hear your criticisms this evening. There's two simple ways to be able to get in contact here this evening. Simply email us your live questions starting right now. Senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. Submit your questions. We look forward to hearing from you. Submit them to senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. If you're watching us on Facebook, simply drop a question and comment into the chat, and we'll get right back to you here with the answers. All right, it is now time to be able to dig deeper. It's time to get our town hall started, and who better to turn it over to than Daniel Swain. As I said, Mr. Swain is a climate scientist with the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. Mr. Swain is going to be focusing on a few very important issues. Number one, how do we know that climate change is here? Two, how does climate change evolve in California and the American West? He's going to be providing an overview of early impacts that climate change is having on the Golden State. Of course, he's going to be looking forward over the next 20 to 30 years and also doing a deep dive on the causes driving the surge and severe weather. And of course, he's going to be advancing the all-important solutions as well. Mr. Swain, we welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll give you a 30-second prompt as you get close to time. The floor is yours, sir, and good evening.
Well, thanks again for the invitation to join this conversation this evening. I'm really encouraged to hear that there are 4,000 people who are going to participate, because I think that's certainly the first stage in solving the underlying problem, is engaging and talking about it. So that's what we're going to do this evening. I'm a climate scientist, and so obviously I study the atmosphere and the ways in which it's changing over time, and in particular the ways in which this changing atmosphere is affecting weather and extreme events like droughts and floods and wildfires, the kind of stuff that really concerns us all. And, really what I'm here to tell you tonight is that climate change is here, not just in California, but globally. This is no longer a prediction about something that's going to happen in the future tense. This is an observed reality all around us today, not just here, but all around the world. And I think that became a much more visceral experience for a lot of people in California over the past 5 years or so, because we have seen so much drought and so many wildfire disasters on a level that we really hadn't seen before in this part of the world. But how do we know that the climate has changed, not just over decades, but over the past century? We really have multiple lines of evidence, the most obvious of which are thermometers. Thermometers all around the world tell us that the Earth is warming and that California is warming too. We can look at things like the continental ice sheets or Arctic sea ice and see that the ice is melting. We can confirm all of these observations by looking down at the Earth from Earth orbiting satellites, which essentially gives us more or less the same picture about rising temperatures and melting ice. We can also test these hypotheses using mathematical models, often called climate models, which help us conduct controlled experiments that we can't do on the Earth itself. All of these independent lines of evidence lead us to an inevitable conclusion, which is that the Earth is warming and that the human emission of greenhouse gases is by far the dominant reason why that is happening. And so I think in California, the signs and symptoms are a little bit different than in other parts of the world. And I think one of the most obvious ones is that California is a much warmer place than it used to be, not just because we're seeing more extreme heat waves, but equally importantly, we're seeing warming at cold times of year and in cold places. So we're seeing even faster warming in some cases in winter and in the mountains. And so that's having an effect on things like snowpack, which is decreasing, which is affecting water supply and the level of drought severity in this part of the world. We've also seen, in addition to an increase in the mean snow line and a decrease in the amount of snowpack, a decrease in the amount of water that's available on the landscape. And that's not so much because we're seeing less precipitation falling from the sky. It's more because it's so much warmer that there's more evaporation leaving the ground, leaving rivers, lakes, and streams, and it becoming unavailable to humans, to agriculture, and to the environment. So we're seeing an intensification of this water cycle. And what we expect to see in a warming California, and something that we're already starting to see, are shifts in precipitation patterns, even in places where the overall amount of precipitation isn't necessarily decreasing. We've already started to see this with precipitation seasonality. We're used to wet winters and dry summers with shoulder seasons in between in the spring and fall. What we're starting to see are drier falls and drier springs, but not necessarily drier winters. And so what we're seeing is a sharpening of that existing seasonality in California's precipitation, along with the warming and the increased evaporation. So what does this mean? Well, it means we've seen a lot more drought, and we've seen a great number of extreme precipitation events interrupting those droughts. all while our average precipitation hasn't changed a great deal over time. And so one of the challenges that results from this, in addition to increasing drought severity, is an increase in the intensity and severity of wildfires. And so this is one of the reasons, the increasing aridification of the landscape due to warming is one of the key reasons why we've seen such an escalation in California's wildfire crisis over the past several decades. It certainly isn't the only reason, but it is a major contributing factor. And something that we haven't seen so much in recent years, but is a significant concern to the scientists who study this sort of thing, is that we may eventually flip the hydrologic coin to the other side of the spectrum. In other words, we've been worried a lot about drought and water scarcity recently for understandable reasons. We've endured two of the worst droughts in California's history over the past decade. The second one is currently ongoing. But in a warming climate, we also expect to see much more intense atmospheric river storms, these intense bursts of rainfall during our rainy season that can lead to flooding and other sorts of problems. And so as the climate warms, in addition to this increasing scarcity of water much of the time, those dry periods are more likely to be interrupted by large storm events and major floods. And even though that's something we haven't seen recently so much, it looms large in climate risk projections for this part of the world. This leads to what we have termed in our own research an increase in precipitation whiplash, this notion that you go increasingly from one side of the spectrum where things are very dry to the other where conditions are very wet in quick succession and alternate back and forth with increasing frequency. But outside of California and across the American West, the overwhelming indicator of climate change has been through these rising temperatures and an increasing water scarcity. This is true all across the Colorado River watershed, which supplies a good portion of California with its water, as well as in the Golden State itself. So this is not a problem that's isolated to California. This is something that's happening really all around the American West and is contributing to this increase in drought severity, as well as the escalation of the wildfire crisis outside of California. And so I think one of the messages that I'm hoping to convey tonight, and I think that some of the other panelists will have similar messages, is that while this is a very big global problem that we are not yet taking seriously enough, not taking essentially the measures that are commensurate with the scale of the problem yet, it is eminently a solvable problem still, even today, if we do the right thing and actually take the problem as seriously as the reality appears to be all around us. And I think we've had lots of evidence of that this past summer, not just here with the wildfires in California, but all around the world over the past year or so with the extreme floods and extreme heat waves we've seen on multiple continents. And in California, there are some potentially unique opportunities to not only mitigate climate change by bringing emissions to zero and eventually solving the underlying problem, but also to adapt to the kinds of changes that we know are coming. The increase in extreme weather events and extreme droughts or extreme floods, for example. California is a place that sees a fair bit of both of these things. And so it might be possible, for example, to use excess water that occurs that is present during the floods of the future to mitigate the drought risks of the future. When it comes to wildfire, most ecologists and fire scientists agree that one of the most promising avenues for reducing risk is to literally fight fire with fire and reintroduce or expand policies of prescribed or managed wildfire at a much lower intensity to avoid the catastrophic fires later on.
About 30 seconds.
Great. And so these are these opportunities to both mitigate and adapt to the changes, to minimize the changes that we see, and also to adapt to the changes that are inevitable, both in this part of the world and elsewhere. And California does have, because of its unique and very widely varying geographies and climate zones, a number of opportunities to leverage them to make for a better future. So I'll leave it there for now, and I look forward to hearing what everyone else has to say.
Thank you so much. That's Daniel Swain. Daniel Swain is a climate scientist, of course, with the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. We are now going to be turning it over to the senior climate scientist from the Union of Concerned Scientists. And we are grateful that Christina Dahl is with us. She really focuses and specializes in extreme heat as well as sea level rise. She's going to be focusing on both of those aspects that are related to climate change. She's going to be talking about the impacts of climate change on people's lives across the nation, what can be expected in the future. She's going to do the deep dive into extreme heat. She's going to be doing a deep dive in sea level rise. And of course, she's also going to be offering some solutions to us here this evening. Ms. Dahl, we're really grateful that you're with us. Thank you so much. The floor is yours, and I'll give you a 30-second prompt.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being part of this event tonight. I'm often asked whether there are things that give me hope when we are facing the climate crisis. And the fact that there are thousands of you listening and dedicating a part of your day, and not just your day, but your evening, your free time after work, to be thinking about climate change with us is part of what gives me hope that we are all in this together and wanting to solve it together. For many of us in California, wildfires and drought weigh very heavily on our minds. And certainly the things that Daniel was just talking about are things that we are all concerned about. Will we have enough water? Will our forests be intact? Will they be burning? And part of the reason these weigh so heavily on us is for a very good reason, right? They're images that we see every year of people's homes being reduced to ash, dozens of people being rescued from an area that's quickly become overwhelmed with flames, or cars jamming a one-lane road trying to get out as flames are licking at their car doors. But as we grapple with this particular manifestation of climate change, people in states far from California are battling with different, but in many cases equally harrowing manifestations of our changing climate. So I want to bring your mind back to just 5 weeks ago. On August 29th, Hurricane Ida made landfall on the coast of Louisiana, and it was bearing many of the fingerprints of climate change. The storm had just undergone a rapid intensification, going from a Category 1 hurricane to a Category 4 hurricane in about 24 hours, which is something that more and more hurricanes are doing as our climate warms. The storm had drawn strength from the abnormally warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, which were made warmer by climate change. And the storm surge associated with the hurricane was deeper and farther reaching because the sea level is higher than it used to be because of climate change. When people who had evacuated in advance of the storm returned to their neighborhoods, they were met with a brutal heat wave. Not only that, they had to weather that heat wave without power, or in many cases, running water. And so we started to see the ways in which a storm, which you could think of as an isolated event, really causes a cascade of different crises. The heat in this case was so intense that the state of Louisiana began evacuating people after the hurricane just so they could get to cooler places. Because as the senator mentioned earlier in the evening, heat is the #1 weather-related killer in the United States. Power was restored to most of New Orleans within about a week after the storm's landfall. So many had endured a week of having no electricity. But there's still about 3,000 people in hurricane-affected areas outside of New Orleans who lack power 5 weeks after the storm. So these are the kinds of events that climate change is really throwing at us. Stronger storms that are causing more devastation in our communities. And on top of that, are more likely to coincide with other weather-related events like heat waves and cause additional strains on things like our electric grid, which have a lot of deferred maintenance and are in desperate need of upgrades. So whether it's Gulf Coast residents trying to rebuild their lives in the midst of power outages, or farmers in the Midwest losing crops due to unending rains and flooding, or farm workers in Florida showing signs of kidney injury because of repeated prolonged shifts of work in extreme heat, there's really nowhere one can go to escape the reality of our changed and changing climate. But to bring it back to the Western United States, I want to talk about the two threats that California is facing that I've worked on in recent years: extreme heat and sea level rise. Work that my colleagues and I have done has shown that the frequency of extremely hot days, so those would be days where there's a heat index or a feels like temperature above 100 in California, are poised to triple between now and the middle of the century if we fail to reduce our carbon emissions globally. That means there are more days that are dangerous to the health of everyone who's outdoors, but particularly people whose jobs require them to be outside, of which there are millions in the state. They are the people who are picking and harvesting our food and making sure that we have a beautiful salad on our plates at dinner time. They're the people who are delivering our packages during a pandemic so that we can stay safe at home. Within that mid-century timeframe, there are also about 20,000 homes across California's coasts that are at risk of chronic flooding due to sea level rise. As with so many of the impacts of climate change, both sea level rise and extreme heat fall particularly hard on low-income communities and communities of color in California. So while we are already feeling the early effects of climate change today, there are much more severe impacts headed our way if we don't reduce our heat trapping emissions now. So to minimize the impacts of global warming, we have to quickly and fully wean ourselves off of burning fossil fuels, transitioning every car, every home to run on clean electricity. Because that can't happen in a day or even a year or even 5 years, we also have to be preparing ourselves and our communities for more frequent extreme heat, larger wildfires, more intense storms, greater uncertainty about when and where and how much water is going to fall. California has already demonstrated really out of the box, leading edge thinking about this problem, both historically and in recent years. Just to name one program, the state is exploring the idea of buying out homes that are at risk from sea level rise at a fair value to the current homeowners, and then renting those homes out either to the current homeowners or to others until they can no longer be occupied because of sea level rise. That's something that no other state in the country is thinking about or talking about, and is the sort of innovative solution we need to be thinking about. We also already have some of the strongest guidelines in the country for where and how coastal communities can build along the coast. So it's going to take much more to get from where we are today to a future that's safe for everyone. More bold visions, more money, more of a focus on how to right the historical wrongs of racism that are currently putting people of color at greater risk. The thing it can't take is more time. We have a narrow window of time in which to avert some of the worst consequences of climate change. And so it's imperative that we begin to act now. Thank you all so much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dahl. And that's right, we're going to be taking questions here in just a bit. We want to remind folks that you can submit your question. We're live. We're taking them live here tonight. Senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. Email us your questions, your comments, your concerns. We look forward to even hearing about your criticisms tonight. Senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We're still over 4,000 strong, streaming into over 4,000 homes this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to hear now from Peter Miller. Peter is, of course, with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And Peter's really going to do a deep dive on the Golden State, discuss California's leadership on the climate crisis, the fact that more work is needed immediately. He's going to be talking about where he believes the Golden State needs to move in regards to a carbon reduction strategy. He's going to also talk about the consequences of not moving now. And we hear this a lot, Peter. How does California and the United States push countries like China to do the right thing when it comes to climate change? And Peter, I know you're going to address that as well. You have 30 seconds, sir. I'll give you a 30-second prompt, I should say. We welcome you, sir, to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. It's good to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I want to just begin by offering my thanks to Senator McGuire and to his staff for the opportunity to speak with all of you tonight. I also want to thank the senator for his strong environmental leadership in the state, which is so important in allowing us all to move forward effectively. The state of California has a unique opportunity and a responsibility to be a leader on climate change. We live in the most populous and prosperous state in the country. We have the clout and the resources to take on a leadership role. We have a responsibility to take action in order to protect the lives and the welfare of California citizens and our environment. And we have unique authority under the Clean Air Act that helps us to do that. We have to clean up our own act, but that's just a starting point. We can't solve this problem by ourselves. We need to have global action. As the senator mentioned, we can't just reduce our emissions in California and expect to solve the problem of climate change. We need to have global action to address the problem. We need to create a model in California that other states and countries can and will emulate and adopt. We need to develop and implement policies that are effective, affordable, and help build a more prosperous future. We've taken strong leadership in the past. In 2002, California passed legislation to adopt greenhouse gas emission standards for cars. These standards allowed other states to choose a more ambitious requirement than the national standard, and eventually became the basis for national vehicle emission standards. In 2006, California passed legislation to cap and reduce statewide emissions back to 1990 levels by 2020. We met that goal 4 years early, and they're now developing a plan to meet a much more ambitious goal for 2030. In 2010, California passed a requirement that 1/3 of the electricity consumed in the state come from renewables. We beat that goal ahead of schedule and below cost, and we're on track to meet the new requirement that 60% of all electricity come from renewables by 2030. Every single time we did this, opponents have said, it can't be done. It's too expensive or it's too difficult. They were wrong. These actions didn't hurt California. Rather, they helped California be a leader in building the industries of the future. Now, nearly 500,000 Californians are employed in the clean energy economy, representing 28% of the state's construction workers, 6 times more workers than in the entire fossil fuel sector. And the state's most valuable export, electric vehicles, producing nearly $5.7 billion in revenue last year alone. Looking forward, there's so much more that needs to be done. So I want to highlight some of the key actions that we need to focus on going forward. First, the overall strategy. We need to clean up electricity and then run our homes, vehicles, and businesses off that clean electricity. We can do this. It's challenging, but the technology already exists and costs are coming down. It's really critical to note, a clean energy grid is not more expensive. The obstacles are political. They're not technological or economic. We can do this. Second, transportation is key. It accounts for more than 50% of our emissions. We have a robust set of policies in place, but we really need to step on the gas. And we also need to come up with a better figure of speech for moving forward aggressively. Heavy industry is key. Cement is responsible for 8% of global CO2 emissions. We need strong standards to transition to cleaner building materials. And I want to highlight that the legislature passed and the governor signed an important bill to move forward in that area. And then finally, we need to invest in our natural and working lands. Given the senator's district, I know a lot of you live in beautiful places near forests or agriculture, rivers and streams. We need to act to protect our homes and our communities. And we need to restore and sustain our forests, our agriculture, our fisheries, and our treasured natural places. We need to turn these lands from sources of CO2 to sinks. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we need to center equity in our policy and in our action. The threat of climate change is greatest to those that have borne the brunt of environmental degradation for decades. We need to invest in these communities and in our people. We're in this together. I want to close by highlighting a couple of near-term actions that you may be reading about. or may soon be reading about. First, the budget. As the Senator mentioned, the legislature took a historic $15 billion from the budget surplus this year and directed it to investment in climate action. Senator McGuire is on a key committee and he deserves credit for his leadership in this effort. A lot of these funds will flow to communities and businesses across this part of the state. I want you to keep your eyes out for innovative investments in forest resilience, in drought response, in climate smart agriculture, and other important programs that are going to be rolling out soon. Second, the Air Resources Board is developing a blueprint for meeting our 2030 goal. They have their work cut out for them. The pace of reductions has to increase fourfold to get to the 2030 goal.
You have about 30 seconds.
A key focus in that effort will be on how we integrate national and working lands into that plan and how we turn those lands from sources of emissions to a growing sink. And finally, just a month from now, world leaders will be gathering in Scotland to negotiate an international agreement on how to address the threat of climate change. California has been a leader on the world stage for many years, given our leadership. And we will have a substantial presence at that meeting. Fortunately, this time we will be joined by a national delegation led by a president who's committed to strong climate action. That's all my prepared comments, and I look forward to the questions and the discussion that follows.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Christina. Daniel, thank you so much. All right, we're going to get into your questions and comments right now. I want to remind you, if you'd like to be able to add to this conversation, we more than welcome you. Please hit us up right now, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We're taking your questions, your comments live right now, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We have literally hundreds of questions that have been coming in as Peter and Christina and Daniel has been speaking, and we're grateful that all of you are with us here tonight. Let's get right into it. I'm going to go to each of our all-star panelists here to be able to answer this first question from Kelly. Kelly wants to know, what is the number one thing that we can all do to curb climate change? Christina, 60 seconds or less, please. What is the number one thing we can do to help curb climate change? Then we'll go to Daniel and then Peter. Christina.
There's so many things that one can do, but because this problem can't fall on the shoulders of individuals alone, the number one thing you can do is hold your elected officials accountable. Anytime someone is running for office, make sure that climate change is a priority for them and that they are going to do everything they can to address it. Because I have a few more seconds, I will also say, anytime you are making a big choice in your life, like buying a car or where to live, make the lowest carbon choice you can. We all have things that we can do. We all have things that are going to be difficult for us to do. And so just bringing that awareness and intention into your everyday life is an important thing as well.
That's Christina Dahl, senior scientist with the Union of Concerned Scientists. We're now going to go to Daniel. Daniel, of course, is a climate scientist at UCLA. All right, Daniel, Kelly asks, what is the number one thing we can do to help curb climate change? Daniel, take yourself off of mute if you don't mind. The floor is yours. 60 seconds.
You know, I couldn't agree more with Christina that the number one thing that everyone can do, and the number one thing that truly everybody can do, regardless of your means or your circumstances, is to A, talk about it, and B, be politically engaged, because this is no longer a problem that we don't know how to solve. We know how to solve the problem of climate change. It's just that we aren't doing the things collectively as a society that we need to do to solve the problem. And it's not an individual burden, it's a collective problem. It's a global problem that's going to require global solutions. And so to achieve those sorts of large-scale changes and to make it easier for individuals to make the kinds of good choices that need to be made, it comes down to essentially being engaged and talking about the problem.
Daniel Swain, thank you so much. We're now going to go to Peter Miller. Peter Miller with NRDC, 60 seconds. Number one thing folks can do to combat climate change.
Well, I'd say Christina hit it out of the park here. I completely agree with her. People should get politically engaged and hold your elected leaders accountable. That's the number one thing we can do, from local to the state to the national level. I'll second what Christina said as well. When you're making important choices in your life about the vehicle that you're going to own or the appliances that you have in your home, look for the most efficient, low carbon alternatives, and contact your local utility, your water utility, your electric utility, and ask for their assistance. They should be there supporting those investments.
Peter Miller, NRDC, thank you so much. We're now going to be going to Christina, then we're going to turn it over to Daniel in just a moment. Christina, a question about cars versus cows. So break it down for us in California when it comes to methane production. Who produces more, and what do you see as solutions for both cars and cows? Christina.
Great question. And I unfortunately don't have the exact numbers on hand, but I do know that transportation emissions are the largest category of emissions in California. So they're also, because a lot of our communities developed with a car culture, it's not always easy to decarbonize, as we say, or electrify that transportation emissions. So that's going to be something that we need to be incentivizing more and more as a state. And as more and more electric cars come onto the market, hopefully we'll start to see prices drop as well, so that we don't need such large subsidies from the state or federal government to make those affordable within the state. When it comes to methane, I would highlight something that's happening right now in the news is the oil spill that has happened off the coast of Southern California and is affecting wetlands and ecosystems there already. And to me, that's just an example of the hazards that are built into our current system of reliance on fossil fuels. So whether it's methane leakages or oil leakages that are affecting ecosystems, we just need to be weaning ourselves off of all of those fossil fuels.
Christina Dahl from the Union of Concerned Scientists. I think we're about 60% of our GHGs in the state come from the automobile. Less than 10%, I believe, comes from cattle, but obviously both need to be focusing on. And Christina, do you believe that we're eventually, and I know this is going to be incredibly controversial, but all the low-hanging fruit has been picked, right? I mean, we need to start looking at bold solutions to be able to slow the speed of this climate crisis. I mean, we're going to have to eventually look at a phasing out of the combustible engine here in California if we truly hope to make a significant dent in this climate crisis. Christina, your thoughts? Then we're going to go to Daniel. 30 seconds, please, Christina.
Yeah, we do. We need a transformation of the way we use energy in our world, not just in California. But I would disagree with the statement that all the low-hanging fruit has been picked. A really large fruit that's still out there on the tree is energy efficiency in our buildings. Many of us live in older homes, old windows, leaky, letting in all the heat, all the cold. There's a lot that we can already do with the solutions we have that we haven't fully deployed yet.
Christina Dahl, thank you so much. Union of Concerned Scientists. We're now going to be going to Daniel Swain. Mr. Swain is, of course, a climate scientist at the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. Mark writes in, Daniel, that he is a longtime subscriber to your newsletter. And if you haven't followed Mr. Swain on Twitter, please do so. And he wants to know, are climate changes likely to make the Pacific Northwest hotter and drier as well? Mr. Swain, give us your outlook. Rockies West, what does it look like over the next 20 to 30 years when it comes to climate change on the west, for the Western United States?
It's a good question, and it's actually not a very simple one to answer, because depending on which part of the west of the Rockies you're talking about, the answer is pretty different. Now, the shared commonality across regions, whether we're talking in the Pacific Northwest or Southern California or the Great Basin, it's getting warmer. We're going to see more extreme heat and less extreme cold. That's true everywhere in the West to some degree. Some places are warming faster than others, but all the places are warming. But when it comes to precipitation, the interesting thing is the Pacific Northwest is actually expected to get significantly wetter. So the wet places in the West are pretty likely to get substantially wetter. And some of the really dry places in the desert Southwest are more likely to get drier. So unfortunately, I don't think that's the pattern that a lot of people would like to see. It's going to amplify the differences between the wet and the dry regions. And the interesting thing about California is it sort of spans very different climate zones. The northernmost part of California along the north coast has a climate more similar to the Pacific Northwest. And places in coastal Southern California have a climate more similar to northern Mexico. And so the dividing line may well be somewhere in California, where it is more likely that the northern part of the West Coast actually gets wetter in a warming climate, and more likely that the far southern portion of the West Coast gets drier. But California is kind of in the middle, and that matches what I mentioned earlier about this increasing precipitation whiplash with more wet, but also more dry, even though the mean doesn't change very much.
So, Daniel, interesting, and some real challenges, I think, ahead for the state of California. And I want to talk about politics. Let's just be candid, Daniel, that politics is now playing a big role in moving climate policy forward. And I want to get to a comment and question that Judy has written in. She says, no, exclamation mark. Climate change is just another left-wing ploy to gain control and scare people who are too stupid to think for themselves. She then says in all capitals, the climate has changed since time began, and there's nothing we can do about it to change it. Mother Nature is watching you. Beware. So, Daniel, talk to Judy. What would you say to her? And is this political or is this real?
Well, I actually get a lot of feedback from folks like Judy, believe it or not. And I think it is worth talking about. There's a couple of points in there that are actually correct. One of which is that the climate is always changing. I guess the second one's an opinion. I would agree that Mother Nature is always watching you. But when it comes to the reality of climate change, it's not political. It's unfortunately become partisan, but it really shouldn't be political because it's just a factual reality. You know, you can go look at glaciers. There are people alive today who grew up living near glaciers around the world that look vastly different today than it did when they were children. So we know the climate is changing. There's no doubt about that. But the more interesting question is how we know why human activities are the reason why the climate has changed this time. And it's true that the climate in the past and even in the present is changing because of natural factors that have nothing to do with humans. That's always been true. It always will be true. But the problem right now is that the rate at which the climate is changing because of human activities completely outpaces any of the natural changes that are occurring at the same time. And so the real issue here is not that humans are the only force in the universe capable of changing Earth's climate. It's that at the moment, we are the dominant force on this planet changing the climate, and it's changing way faster than it would have from natural factors alone.
So, Daniel, if you were to say 3 decades ago, would you have thought that we would be at the place that we are now in regards to a changing climate, or do you believe it's been expedited?
Yeah, there's another question I get a lot, and it's another good one because it's got kind of a complicated answer. When it comes to how warm the Earth is today relative to how warm it was a few decades ago, the predictions from a few decades ago are actually spot on. We've warmed globally almost exactly as much as we expected to by this point in time. But I think what's happening is that a lot of the impacts from that warming are more extreme than I think a lot of folks, even scientists, had anticipated. So the level of increase in extreme weather events in certain places, the level of impacts on humans and our society has been greater, and on the environment and the different ecoregions around the world has been greater for that level of warming. Even though we got the warming right, I think we underestimated the impacts. The thing that surprised me, though, is, and I think that surprised a lot of scientists who've been studying this for decades, is by now, a lot of us thought that we'd be farther along the path towards solutions. And we really haven't made globally a tremendous amount of progress yet. We still can, but we really haven't started down that road yet. I sometimes liken it, the analogy I like to use is that we're on a train running downhill, but the analogy is not that the brakes don't work. It's that the engineer is choosing not to apply the brakes. Brakes are fully functional, but we're not using them.
That's a great analogy. Thank you so much, Daniel Swain from UCLA. Christina, we talked about this earlier. Give us your take, and then I want to go to Peter to talk about fog in just a moment. But Christina, let's go to you. Your thoughts on where did you think we would be right now, 2021, with climate change? Do you believe that it's expediting? Give us your analysis, and I want to go to Peter Miller.
Yeah, I would agree with Daniel here that the model predictions that we had 20, 30 years ago have been very surprisingly accurate, given how simplistic those models look from today's perspective and today's technology. But in addition to some of the consequences of that warming kind of unfolding more quickly and more severely than we might have expected, and by that I'm thinking of things like the strengthening of hurricanes, the increase in the size of wildfires. I think, to me, something that has been surprising is just how much of an impact those events have on daily life. It's very easy from an academic perspective to say, in 20 years, we anticipate there being 3 more Category 4 hurricanes in a given year. But that doesn't really get to what that means for people. And what we're seeing is that even though we've only warmed the planet by 1 degree Celsius in the past 100, 120 years, we are already living in a deeply changed world. And those changes are affecting us much more profoundly than I would have expected, as someone starting out in this field 25 years ago. So, yeah, in many ways, we are where we thought we would be, and it's just worse than we thought it would be.
Christina Dahl, thank you so much, Union of Concerned Scientists. We're now going to be going to Peter Miller from NRDC. Peter, we've been getting questions from folks who live in San Francisco, who live up in Bayside in Humboldt County, who live in Bodega Bay in Sonoma County about fog. All of these questions are related to each of these individuals believe that they're seeing less fog than they did 20 years ago, all long-term residents, San Francisco, up in Bayside, as well as Bodega Bay. So let's talk about fog. And then I want to get into water and wildfire in just a moment. Peter, the question is, for example, from Gregory, will Bay Area fog survive climate change, or is it anticipated that it's going to cease? Then we heard from James in Ileana. We have noticed after 20 plus years in our hometown in Big Lagoon in Humboldt County that we have less frequent fog and it's drier than it once was. So Peter, talk to us about this. The Bay, the North Coast, famous for its fog. What happens to it with climate change?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's actually a fairly complex scientific question about how climate change is going to affect local weather patterns. But in general, the models are suggesting that we're going to see a migration northward of climate zones. So the Bay Area will look more like Central California. Northern California, Humboldt will look more like the Bay Area. And over time, we're going to see a hotter, drier climate along the coast. As Daniel said, there's a lot of complexities there, but that's certainly what we're anticipating. One of the challenging things about this is that we may see modest, small, maybe imperceptible changes year to year. And someone who's lived in a particular spot for 30 years may notice it. But over time, those will accumulate, and then they'll be punctuated by some of these extreme events, like we're seeing now, one of the worst droughts in California history, that may have a huge impact on local ecosystems and communities. We're also, there may be these dramatic changes in climate systems that happen as we get further along the path of climate change. So there's growing concern about ocean current patterns, particularly in the Atlantic, but also in other parts of the world. Fog is highly dependent on the current ocean currents that we have in California. If those change, we're going to see a substantial impact on fog and other conditions in Northern California.
That's Peter Miller. Peter Miller is with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you so much, Peter. We're going to go to Christina. Christina, a lot of concern about the drought. And let's get into it. And then I want to go to Daniel because there's a question specifically about his opening comment. So we've heard that we may see more significant rainfall in a shorter period of time during a changing climate than we would have 50 years ago. So we're more dependent on these Pineapple Express storms, right, than ever before. So Christina, talk to us about solutions. Does California need to build additional storage? Should we be looking at additional direct injection into the underground aquifer? Should we be looking at additional desalinization? I think there's probably going to be several solutions to this, but let's talk about less frequent but more intense storms and how can California capture that water if we're looking at less snowmelt? Christina.
A great question. So right now in California, we have an incredibly engineered water system, right? A system of reservoirs, of pipelines. And that system was designed for the climate of the past. We're already seeing the ways in which that system's not sufficient for the climate we have now. And with the changes that are coming down the pike of having more of our precipitation concentrated in a shorter season, more variable precipitation from year to year, we really need to be looking at our water infrastructure and asking, is this going to be able to cope? Are we going to be able to store that precipitation when it happens so that we can use it when we need it? And that's going to require water managers throughout the state to really be incorporating the latest science into their decision-making processes. And that's not something that has typically needed to be done in the past. In the past, they could look at total annual precipitation, and that would be a sufficient guide for how to manage water in the state. But as we look at this more variable precipitation that's coming down the pike, we need to be saying, okay, do we need to expand our reservoirs so that we can capture more water when it's wet? Do we need to consider how we're allocating water to different sources to make sure that we can continue to have a thriving agricultural industry in the state? So a lot of pieces of that water system need to be examined critically through this lens of what the latest science is telling us.
And candidly, Christina, I'm going to have you do 30 seconds on this, but I mean, the current system that we have in California, it's built around snowmelt, right? A lot of it is built around snowmelt. I think that the figure is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, over the last 20, 30 years, Rockies West, we're seeing about 30% less than what we once had. So we got to rethink the way the California aqueduct system, our reservoir system is in play now, and be more focused on these intense rainmaker events, less on snow. And that means we need a long-term plan for that, correct?
Absolutely. We know that snowpack is going to only dwindle farther in a warming world. And so we won't have as reliable a source of water during our drier months as we have in the past. So we really do need to be looking at capturing the water we do receive to make sure that we have it all year round. And it's going to be a challenge, right? It's our water system's not built for that right now. So we need to be, taking a very critical look at it and thinking about how we can upgrade it so that it continues to meet our needs.
That's Christina Dahl. She is a senior climate scientist with the Union of Concerned Scientists. We're grateful that she's here tonight. We want to remind you and thank you. I got to say, we have been inundated with questions and comments. We're going to go to as many as possible. And I want to say thank you so much to our panel here tonight. We're going to get into our lightning round in just a few moments, but we have a few more that I want to make sure that we hit. So let's go to Mr. Swain. Mr. Swain, Walter writes in, is California a bubble? What about China? What about India? How come nuclear is never mentioned as a power source? What about the mining damage that we see? And how do we impact other countries that simply turn their back on the issue of climate change? And Daniel, I think in the news that we've seen, a lot of discussion about China's use of coal, Japan's use of coal, India's use of coal. So how do we impact in a positive way those countries to do the right thing? And is it worth it for California to go in alone? Daniel.
I think, as with many things, there's a bunch of different ways to look at this. But I think the way I look at it, and I think the way that a lot of climate researchers approach the problem, is from the basic understanding that climate change is a cumulative carbon emission problem. So climate change is not a problem because the emissions today are really high. Climate change is a problem because we've been emitting that carbon at an ever increasing rate since the Industrial Revolution. So if you look back in history, where the vast majority of the carbon dioxide molecules that are up there in the atmosphere that are causing the warming right now actually came from, it's largely from the United States and Western Europe during the 20th century and the early part of the 21st century. Today, it is true that countries like China are now outpacing the total emissions of the US. But it's important to realize that the per capita emissions in those countries is still far lower than in the US or still most of Western Europe. So if you're taking an energy efficiency approach to it, places like China and India are vastly more energy efficient than the US is, even though the cumulative emissions are the current emissions are much higher because there's a lot more people who live there. So there are interesting questions about energy equity. Obviously, we don't want to cut energy off from people who benefit greatly from it. It's really a question of how to generate that energy in a way that doesn't produce this carbon pollution that warms the planet. And there's obviously complications and externalities with how we do that. There are issues with how we mine rare earth metals for electric batteries in electric cars, for example. But these are also solvable problems, and we are going to have to solve them too if we want to solve the overarching problem of climate change, soon enough to really avert some of the worst outcomes.
That's Daniel Swain with UCLA, wonderful climate scientist. We're now going to be going to Peter Miller. We're going to transition from water. We're going to talk fire and forests here. I want to go to Peter. Peter's with NRDC. This comes in from Robert. And I'm not sure I agree with Robert, but I want to, Peter, get your take as an expert on this. Robert says numerous investigations and analysis establish that forest carbon offsets provide no additional carbon savings. So money to conservation comes at a cost to the climate. Your thoughts on that, Peter, in regards to carbon offsets, and why don't you talk about that and how that works with forests? Peter, I'm going to ask you to try to do that in about 60 to 90 seconds to answer Robert.
Great, I'll do my best. The natural working lands that we enjoy in the state are going to be a critical part of the solution if we're going to be successful in addressing this threat. That includes forests, which is clear science that forests are a key opportunity to sequester carbon in the soil and in the plant matter. So what we have to do is we have to develop and implement policies that effectively protect our forests and ensure they're able to continue doing that job of taking the carbon out of the air, putting it into the trunks, putting it into the soil, and storing it where they can be safely sequestered for centuries. Those programs are challenging because it's difficult to measure and track and sustain programs that achieve that goal. So it's something that state policymakers, state agencies need to continue to work on. California is a leader in trying to do that effectively. I say success is mixed at this point, but it's a key area in which we need to continue working to make those programs successful and effective. We can't just walk away and say, well, it's not working.
And Peter, your bottom line, 20 seconds. I'm going to go to Christina to talk wildfires, carbon offsets with forests. Is that a strategy for success?
Well, it can be a strategy for success. I've compared it in the past to to seafood. The metaphor I use is seafood. You can go out and get a seafood meal that's not very good and maybe gives you food poisoning, but that doesn't mean that every seafood meal is bad. So you need to be careful about offsets. You need to ensure that they're high quality. You need to ensure that they're real and verifiable and provide net incremental emission reductions. And if we can do that, then they can be an effective part of our overall climate strategy.
That's Peter Miller with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're now going to go to Christina. Christina, we're going to go into the issue of wildfires. So we are, like, I'm not joking, we've probably received 36 questions tonight on wildfires and how climate change is impacting the severity and the size of wildfires. So Christina, break it down for us. We're going to ask you to try to do it in 60 seconds. I apologize. But so what's the relationship between climate change and the size, severity, intensity of wildfires? Christina.
Sure. So by almost any fire metric that you look at, if you look globally, whether it's at the size of fires, the intensity of fires, the number of fires, they are all showing that they're growing worse and that there's a connection there to climate change. Here in California, the primary reason for that is that the climate's getting warmer, and that is causing the vegetation to dry out. When that vegetation dries out, it serves as fuel for the fires. They're ready to burn anytime there's a spark. So there's a distinct connection here in the West and in California between the warming climate, the aridity or the dryness of our vegetation, and the increase in wildfire size. So the fires that we are experiencing this year, last year, the last few years that are larger than ever before, these are a hallmark case of how climate change is impacting the world around us. That said, it's not the only thing that's affecting fires. As someone mentioned earlier, the fact that we have neglected our forests and let them get overgrown over time has impacted fires. The fact that we have been suppressing all fires and not letting some fires burn, and despite the fact that fire is a natural part of California's ecosystem, that's also increased the load of vegetation that's ready to burn. We've also developed a lot of communities right alongside fire-prone places. And that means that there's more chance that human activity could spark a fire. And it also means that when a fire happens, there are more people at risk. So climate change is playing a huge and very clear role in driving these fires and making them larger. But it's not the only thing that we need to be thinking about.
No, thank you so much, Christina. Very grateful to that. So let's go to Daniel. Daniel, you are focused so much on fire. And one of the conversations that Daniel and I had is it could be depressing at times, right? It provides so much anxiety of seeing this gorgeous forest land, oak woodlands burn year after year, and literally tens of thousands of homes. So Daniel, let's talk about solutions. State of California is literally investing hundreds of millions of dollars in fire prevention, forest thinning, removing dead and dying trees, taking a look at wildfire breaks, vegetation management. Talk to us about the best solutions you see out there to be able to help over the next decade to bring these forest fires in California under control. What's your thought, Daniel?
I think increasingly, my thinking is focused on decoupling wildfire from catastrophe, because fire itself in the natural landscape is not a bad thing. As Christina mentioned, one of the reasons, in addition to climate change, why we're having such severe wildfires in the forests in the American West and in some other parts of the world is that we totally removed the vast majority of those low intensity, natural, beneficial fires that would otherwise have come along and kept the forests at a thinner, healthier state. And so, a lot of our thinking in the climate and fire science world today is focused more on making the fires that we do see transition from being these catastrophes, these utter catastrophes that are horrifying and depressing to see over the past decade in California, where so many homes burn, lives are lost, and people, you suffer through weeks on end of these horrible smoke conditions. And transforming those into lower intensity beneficial fires. So, in a warming 21st century, it's often said in the fire ecology communities that there's going to be more fire on the landscape no matter what. We don't really have a no fire option, but the choice we have is whether the fires that we do see moving forward are this ever increasing escalation of fire catastrophes, or whether we sort of return to a regime where a large majority of these fires are actually producing more benefits than harm. And how do we do that? Well, I think in the fire ecology community, there's a widespread understanding that prescribed and managed fires are going to have to become a much larger part of our reality. We're going to have to learn to live with them and tolerate them if we don't want to see the catastrophic fires. And there's also some actions that individual communities and regions can take to make structures and communities more resilient to the wildfires that do occur. There are certain parts of the world where structures aren't at as much risk as they are in California. And so there are things we can do in the meantime as well. But I think the large scale solution to the fire problem is actually more fire, but in a different form.
And Daniel, quick response to this on a follow-up is, what Christina had said is absolutely right? We're behind the 8 ball when it comes to preparing our communities, hardening our communities to the reality that we have. It's going to take some time for California. I mean, we're investing literally billions of dollars over the next decade in forest health and resiliency. It's going to take time to be able to get out of the mess we're in. 30 seconds, Daniel, your thought on that? Then I want to go to Peter.
I absolutely agree. The next decade or so are going to be rough no matter what. I just think that's the unfortunate reality. And I think that's why it's really important in the meantime to get serious about doing a lot more prescribed fire, but also strengthening communities so that they aren't at as much risk when these fires come along. A huge success story from this past summer and amid a lot of destruction is this communities around South Lake Tahoe, which had done precisely that. And then the Caldor fire came along and was devastating communities on the western slope in El Dorado County, places like Grizzly Flats. But then it came up, in this area in Salt Lake Tahoe where there were vegetation treatments, prescribed fire, and home hardening had been done to a high degree over the past decade. And few, if any, homes burned in that part of the county. And so that's a big success story that I hope we can replicate elsewhere in California moving forward.
Daniel Swain, climate scientist, Institute of Environment Sustainability, UCLA. We are now 3,600 strong tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We're still taking your questions, your comments. Senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. Okay, here we go, Peter. We're going to turn this into a lightning round. And we got a family question. This comes in from Ari, Alex, Becky, and Chris. And the Thomas family, they ask, based upon the latest science, we need net negative CO2 emissions as soon as possible. So California's current goals seem out of sync. Do you know if California is going to be reinvesting in its goals accordingly? What do you know about California's goals in the United Nations COP26 proceedings in Glasgow? We expect California to advocate for and lead for more updated science appropriate to achieve CO2 goals. Peter, I'm going to just butt in for 20 seconds and just say, look, we just passed this $15 billion investment, the largest investment in our state's history, one of the largest investments in America's history in climate action. And let's just be blunt about it. It's not nearly enough. We also have to take a look at bold legislative action on tackling the biggest contributors to this crisis. But Peter, why don't you get to the Thomas's question? Then I want to go to another one for you, Peter. 30 seconds, please.
California needs to do everything it can. People ask questions about should we be doing A or B, which one's more important? And the answer is there's no ors, it's all ands. We need to do everything we can. We need to create a model that we can then bring to the rest of the world, a compelling, effective, affordable model for addressing the solution. Addressing this crisis that's upon us today.
So I want to get to the next related question, and I'm going to go to Peter, I'm going to go to Daniel, I'm going to go to Christina. We're going to ask for 30 seconds from each of our panelists. And Peter, you're going to be our guinea pig on this, so Peter's going to be thinking off the cuff here. So Ken asks, what immediate changes can we make to reduce the world's carbon footprint by 5 to 20%. What immediate changes can we make to reduce the world's carbon footprint by 5 to 20%? Peter, 30 seconds. I'm going to go to Daniel, and then I'm going to go to Christina. Have at it, Peter.
Tim, I'll say there's a couple things. We need to transition our electricity generation from fossil fuels to clean electricity, to wind and solar. And then we need to take our homes and our vehicles, and we need to make them use electricity rather than fossil fuels and run them off that clean electricity. That's the number one thing we need to do.
Peter Miller, NRDC. Let's go to Daniel Swain from UCLA. What immediate changes can we make to reduce the world's carbon footprint by 5 to 20%? Mr. Swain.
I would absolutely agree with what we just heard. Electrify everything as fast as we can and use renewable energy for all of it. That's really the lowest hanging fruit on that can be achieved at a local, regional, state, national level right now.
Ms. Dahl, Union of Concerned Scientists, what immediate changes can we make to reduce world's footprint by 5 to 20%? Ms. Dahl.
So I'd absolutely agree with the previous two panelists, but I'd also add in that we've actually been through this experiment over the past 18 months. So last year, we saw global emissions drop by about 6% as a result of the slowdown of the economy because of COVID. Think about the amount of pain and suffering that people endured to accomplish that reasonably small drop in emissions. We now need to see that level of change on an annual basis and without all of the harmful consequences that people have been suffering. So we need to make it electrifying everything so that people can commute to work and get back and forth with clean energy and not be stuck at home like we've been the last year and a half. All of those changes need to happen quickly, and every year we need to see that kind of drop in emissions.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room that some will talk about, and I think it's a valid point. If we electrify everything, then do we leave ourselves vulnerable because we have, I'm just going to be candid, and I will not speak for any of our panelists, but we have a utility here in Northern California that simply has underinvested in their infrastructure and a convicted felon, if I could just be candid. PG&E needs to do a much better job at maintaining their system, making it safer for communities. So Christina, if we're electrifying everything, what happens when you have the right arm, PG&E, simply not keeping up, modernize their system, moving forward with vegetation management, and then you have these these blackouts that we're seeing. So, Christina, talk about that, because I think that's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, well, this really needs to go hand in hand, right? There's an incredible amount of deferred maintenance, not just for PG&E, but utility companies throughout the country. For example, what we saw earlier this year in Texas, when they had an incredibly cold snap, the power grid went down and people died of cold in their homes. It's not just a California problem, it's a national problem. So we need to invest in making our grid more resilient so that it can withstand temperature extremes, fire extremes. But we also need to make sure that it can be incorporating more renewable energy sources more fluidly. So we know that we can do that because we've seen our grid grow and become better in this state as we've brought more and more renewables online, but we need to really ramp that up. So absolutely need to hold PG&E and other utility companies accountable for maintaining their infrastructure so that we can all be safe. We can continue to use power even during extreme events, but also need to be bringing a lot more clean energy online.
Christina Dahl, Union of Concerned Scientists. We're going to jump back to Peter Miller. Peter Miller, NRDC, you talked about jobs. Mateo writes in about jobs. How will your solutions to the California climate problem grow the economy? Are you planning on entirely sacrificing California's economy to help the climate? Will new jobs and green energy be created? And what will they be? Should we be panicking, as you suggested in your opening statement, that's directed to me, or should we be focusing on finding actual feasible solutions? So Peter, you talked about green energy jobs now outpacing fossil fuel jobs in this state. Talk about that. And what does this green economy look like? It's not just a buzzword, it's real. Talk about that, Peter.
Yeah, so I think that perhaps the best thing that California can bring to bear in solving this problem is the innovation economy. California has been a leader in bringing innovation to the world, and in particular on clean energy. There's a fallacy out there that addressing the climate crisis is going to hurt our economy. The opposite is true, and we've been proven that over the past decades of action in California. Clean energy jobs is one of the largest and fastest growing parts of the economy. And as I mentioned earlier, our biggest export right now is electric vehicles. So we can build our economy, we can create good jobs for California citizens, and we don't have to sacrifice. Right now, solar energy is the lowest cost source of energy now. It's cheaper to generate using solar than to generate power from an existing coal plant. And that's in part because of California's leadership on the issue. So I want to put to bed this fallacy that somehow this clean energy transition is going to hurt the economy or hurt jobs. The opposite is true.
That's Peter Miller from NRDC. Christina and I were talking about our kids before we went on air tonight. And a question comes in from Anna Rose. Anna Rose writes in, as a public school teacher, how do I explain to my students that we waited for this crisis to unfold before we finally decided to act? My high school students are keenly aware that they are inheriting a warming planet and trash-filled oceans, and it breaks my heart that we leave them with such a tragic legacy. Let's talk about that. Anna Rose writes in, Christina, you have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. I have a 6-month-old. I think a lot of what we do is doing it for our kids. So Christina, what do you say to that public high school teacher, Anna Rose, about explaining to her students that we waited to act? Christina.
Yeah, I think this is a moment when we as adults need to take responsibility and own our actions here. When I look at how little has changed since I started studying the issue of climate change 25 years ago, I'm ashamed. I wish that we could have done so much more, that we could have taken the projections we had 30 years ago and acted on them instead of watching them play out. So we have made a huge mistake, and we've put our kids' lives and our grandchildren's lives at risk because of it. I would also encourage this teacher and anyone to connect her students to the youth climate movement. This movement of young people is global and more powerful, frankly, than any movement I have seen in this space over the past 25 years. Young people recognize that this is happening, that it's going to be primarily falling on their shoulders to deal with these changes. And they're mad about it, rightfully so, and demanding accountability and action from us adults. So I would say that, yes, this is really, really unfair. And yet you can join your voice with others and demand change.
Absolutely. And getting back to what Christina had said earlier is the fact that need to hold those government officials, state level, federal level, as well as those at the local level, accountable for moving climate action. Absolutely. I want to go to Daniel. Daniel, we have 2 comments coming in, one from Ted, one from Dana. And candidly, they don't believe in climate change. I want to hear what you have to say, then I want to hear what Peter has to say. Ted says, Ted Ewert, I've heard the same nonsense for 30 years now. Stop spreading this BS and scaring people. Do something productive for a change. And then Dana writes in, this is the big planet, and we've been going for millions of years before man came along. Unless they can control the weather, we can only speculate why they get paid the big bucks, right? This is BS. So Daniel, what do you say to Dana and what do you say to Ted? And then I want to go to Peter.
Well, it is a big planet. And I think that's part of the reason why it's genuinely difficult to get your head around sometimes. I mean, I feel this way as somebody who studies this professionally. The fact that we live on a huge planet, 70% water. It feels like the other side of the world is a very distant place. And yet, one of the things that's unifying all of us on this large planet is the fact that we all share the same climate and we share the same atmosphere. And since the Industrial Revolution, essentially, we've been treating the atmosphere like a waste dump for carbon. And it doesn't feel like that should be having as big of an impact as it is. But it is. I mean, that's just the inevitable conclusion from ruling out all the other possible reasons why the climate has changed as much as it has. Believe me, climate scientists for decades were looking for some alternate explanation. Is it the sun, volcanoes, bad luck? Unfortunately, it's none of those things. It is us. And I think realizing that, humans are now a force of nature on Earth, I think is it's counterintuitive, but it is the reality of the Earth we currently inhabit.
Daniel Swain, UCLA. All right, we're going to go to our final three questions. Valerie writes in, and I want to get Peter's take on this. She says to me, you recently passed laws that require cities to build more housing. How can you require this when the cities don't even have enough water to supply their current residents? The city needs to drill more wells, store water in the aquifer, and develop an infrastructure to use recycled water for watering landscape. Look, Valerie, I thank you so much for writing in tonight. I'll say my piece, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter. We have a housing crisis in California. I'm younger, and it took everything that my wife and I had to be able to continue to live in the community that I grew up in. And we need to continue to look at more efficient housing in our communities, focusing on infill, focusing on what we just passed, allowing for the potential of duplexes and fourplexes, more efficient neighborhood-driven development. And we have to ensure that cities, counties have the resources to become more water efficient. And we're literally investing billions of dollars in the coming 36 months to be able to build additional off-stream storage for cities, to be able to extend purple piping from wastewater treatment plants, to be able to irrigate residences, to be able to irrigate playing fields and golf courses. We are focused on making landscaping more efficient, taking out lawns, etc. My personal opinion is I don't think it is an either or at this moment, because we have two crises right now. And we can't continue to build like a sprawl that we always have. It's simply not efficient, and it's not good for the planet. And we have to continue to make a place to live for working families. And I think it's really critical. But Peter, I want to get your take on this. I know NRDC has been very focused on housing as well. What say you on this subject? I'm going to ask you to keep it to about 60 seconds, and then we're going to go to final questions for Daniel, Christine, and then we're going to wrap up. Peter.
Yeah, well said, Senator. I was born in California, and we all wish we could live in those days of the past, but we've got 40 million people in this state, and we have to figure out a way to allow the residents of the state to have adequate, affordable housing. And one of those ways is by building infill housing in cities to help reduce our impact on the environment and to lower the cost of the housing. And it's a challenge. 40 million people is a lot of people. But it's something we have to take on, and we have to take responsibility for housing the state citizens.
So it's not an either or. We have to go up versus out, right, is what I hear you say, and focus on that infill and more transit-oriented development. Correct, Peter?
That's right. The sprawl housing that we've built in the past puts people out in areas that require them to drive further, use more gasoline, more water, and puts them at risk of damage from wildfire, because people are sprawling out into the wildland interface where they're at risk. So we do have to do some more infill housing. It's critical in order to meet this challenge.
Peter Miller is the Western Region Director for Climate and Energy for the Natural Resources Defense Council. You've been fabulous tonight, Peter. We're going to come back to you for a 30-second closing comment. We're going to go to the last question for Mr. Swain. Mr. Swain, a lot of questions tonight on desalination and taking ocean water and turning it into drinking water for cities and counties. Give us your take. And Barry writes in, let's see here. Barry writes in, what should we be doing to more aggressively address our drought and do desalination and water importation to play a more significant role. So what is your opinion, Daniel, on desal and what that means for our cities and counties during this drought?
Well, California's got this interesting problem where most of the state is tied into the various state water systems that derive most of their water from the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada. So that's the snowmelt we keep talking about. So that's the Central Valley, all the big cities, San Francisco, LA gets some of its water from California and some of its water from the Colorado Basin. But interestingly, there's a lot of the coastal counties, particularly in Central and Northern California, are either minimally or not at all tied into the state water systems. They're kind of on their own within individual counties and individual communities. And this is a big problem during extreme droughts because once the reservoirs run dry locally, you don't really have a backup to draw from somewhere else in the state, unlike a lot of the big cities in the state. And so those are contexts where maybe, at least in a sort of as an emergency drought backup situation, it might not be a bad idea to consider some level of local desalination in these coastal counties that don't have these interties elsewhere in the state during droughts. It probably isn't a long-term solution, though, because it is extremely energy intensive, extremely inefficient, and extremely expensive. Not to mention that it actually has pretty significant environmental implications because you have to dump all of that concentrated seawater brine somewhere. So on a limited basis, it may be a reasonable emergency backup plan, but in the long run, it really isn't going to contribute in any meaningful way to the overall scarcity problem moving forward. And so I would hope that we sort of take other approaches to increasing resilience in the long term.
Daniel Swain talking about desalination for communities. Thank you so much. He's a climate scientist, of course, with the Institute of Environment and Sustainability out of UCLA. Thank you so much, Mr. Swain. We're going to come to you for closing comments. We're going to ask each of our panelists, what keeps you hopeful in these challenging times? That's how we're going to end it here tonight. What keeps you hopeful in these challenging climate times? There's a lot of climate anxiety out there, but we're going to ask each of our panelists to chime in on that. But before we do, final question here to Christina Dahl. She's a senior climate scientist from the Union of Concerned Scientists. She focuses a lot on sea level rise, on extreme heat. Here we go. This last question for you, Ms. Dahl, coming in from Deborah tonight. How serious is the sea rise problem in coastal areas, in areas by San Francisco Bay and in the North Bay, and what can be done about it? Ms. Dahl, you have the final word.
Sure. So when we look at the state of California, the region that has the highest near-term risk from sea level rise is actually the Bay Area. And it's not the ocean-facing communities. It's not, the western shore of San Francisco. It's communities that ring the Bay. Some of the most vulnerable communities to sea level rise are places like East Palo Alto, Corte Madera up in the North Bay. That's where we see we have very low-lying land and a lot of homes concentrated there. So, and in the case of East Palo Alto, a lot of the homes there are people who have lower incomes and they're people of color. So when we look at how we can best address sea level rise in the Bay Area, we need to be focusing first on the communities that are most exposed and most vulnerable to sea level rise. But we also need to be coordinating regionally because there's really interesting modeling work that's happening, I believe at UC Berkeley, that's looking at, if you build a seawall in one part of San Francisco Bay, how does that affect the communities around that seawall? And what they're finding is that it certainly does. And so we need to be taking an integrated and regional approach where communities are talking to each other and coordinating with each other so that we don't have a patchwork of solutions where one community is benefiting, but it's to the detriment of a neighboring community. So a lot of complexity there. But, there's also the fact that in a lot of coastal communities in California, you have a lot of topography. You've got mountains. And though erosion might be a problem there along our coasts, long-term sea level rise is going to play out over a longer time frame than it will in bay communities and a lot of communities on the East and Gulf coasts. So we have time to plan and time to make our communities more resilient, but we need to get on it.
That's Christina Dahl. She is a senior climate scientist from the Climate and Energy Program with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Thank you so much, Christina. All right. Closing comments from each of our fabulous panelists. We want to say thank you to Peter. Thank you to Christina. Thank you to Daniel. We're going to go in order from where we ended all the way up to where we began. So we're going to start with Peter. 30 seconds, Peter. What keeps you hopeful? What is that hope that's inside of you that we're going to be able to tackle this? And in these challenging times, what gives you that bright light? Peter.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say, first of all, what keeps me hopeful is the interest of people like the 4,000 people who took the time to call into this today, who are interested in this issue, are committed to doing something about it. In particular, to that school teacher who is educating her students about this issue and working to help them try and address it as they go forward. So the youth who are concerned about this issue, I think are going to be key to solving the problem. I'm also hopeful by California's record of success in addressing challenging problems, at developing innovative solutions, and at moving forward collectively to build a better future for ourselves.
Peter Miller. Mr. Miller is talking about how California can lead the way, how young people can lead the way, keeping him helpful. Of course, he's with the Natural Resources Defense Council in focusing on the Western region on climate and energy. Thank you so much, Mr. Miller. All right, Christina, let's talk about it. Your closing comments. What keeps you hopeful in these challenging climate times? Ms. Dahl, the floor is yours.
Yeah, what keeps me hopeful is that when I look back to human history or even just US history, we have evidence of just how much people can accomplish when they work collectively. And, it's a very silly thing, but I live in the city. I like to walk a lot. And sometimes I'm walking along the sidewalk and thinking, we built this. And if I kept walking, I could walk back to my hometown in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, along the roads that we've built, because we envisioned an amazing system of transportation. Yes, it has problems, but we built this. And it took time, it took energy, it took money, it took perseverance. And we still have all of those things because we are humans. This is a human problem. Humans created it, and humans are the solution to it. If this were some problem that was coming to us because the sun was getting brighter, it would be a much harder problem to solve. This is a people problem. And because we are innovative people, we can solve it.
It was beautiful. Thank you so much, Ms. Dahl. Ms. Dahl is, of course, the senior climate scientist for climate and energy and the Union of Concerned Scientists. Thank you so much. Great job, Ms. Dahl. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Daniel Swain, final comments from you. What keeps you hopeful in these challenging climate times?
Yeah, I'm mostly going to echo what we just heard from the other two panelists, which is that I'm encouraged that there are 4,000 people on this call on a Wednesday night. And also that from my physical science perspective, I'm encouraged by the fact that this is still a solvable problem. There's a lot of work to be done, and we need to do it sooner rather than later. But as Christina mentioned, this is not an asteroid or a comet hurtling towards Earth. This is fundamentally a human problem, which means that it has human solutions. And so I think that's what keeps me hopeful.
That is Daniel Swain. Thank you so much, Mr. Swain. He is with the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. We want to say thank you so much to each and every one of you for tuning in tonight. And I'll chime in on this. What keeps me hopeful? Living in California. The reason why I say that is that, yeah, the Golden State, we all have challenges. Every 50 states has challenges. But this state has a track record of innovation, of can-do attitude. And we have a track record of leading this nation, leading the planet on climate action. We've done it before, and Californians are going to demand it again. And we need to step up. We need to redouble our efforts. And what also keeps me hopeful is hearing from young people. The young people of this nation are fed up. They want to be able to move forward with positive change on climate change. They want action and they demand it now. And that's why I firmly believe that our best days are still ahead. And the third reason why I'm hopeful, as much tragedy, and in the district that I represent in Northern California, there are very few areas in this country that have been hit hard as the North Coast when it comes to wildfires. And it's brought the issue of climate change home, and it's made it incredibly relevant. And I firmly believe that there are more people that are willing to sacrifice for future generations based off of the challenges that they're seeing right now on the ground because of the wildfires and because of the smoke. And as Christina said, when we work together collectively, we're going to get the job done. I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Christina. I want to say thank you to Daniel. I want to say thank you to Peter. Very, very grateful. We want to say thank you to Abby and to Sophia and to Carrie and to Rich, who are behind the scenes helping make tonight possible. And finally, we want to say how grateful we are to each and every one of you. We started out with over 4,000 folks on the line tonight. We're going to end this evening still with about 2,200 folks after an hour and a half of, at times, wonky conversation, critical but wonky conversation on the climate. And it is hopeful that so many of you have tuned in, have chimed in, and are willing to take action. Thank you so much for joining us. We are grateful. And I promise you, California is going to continue to lead the way. In our best days, they're still ahead. Have a great night. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you for watching.